The world needs people that refuse to be the minions, so let your freak flag fly. On this episode, we talk to alternative school social worker Mr. W about misconceptions placed on those being labeled as the bad kids, and giving them the tools in their toolbox to deal with those persons of authority, whether it be a teacher or a boss. On this episode of the Captain's Pod. Welcome to episode number 30 of the Captain's Pod. I am your host, Brian Kovacs. They call me the Captain. On today's episode, we talk to a gentleman named Matt, but they call him Mr. W. Mr. W is a social worker at an alternative school. Now, what does that mean? Essentially, he is at the school for, air quotes, the bad kids. It's a label that all of us on this episode hate. Myself, Mr. W, and Michelle Lynn, as she also joins us. Michelle has been a teacher in the public school system for 17 years. She's got a double master's degree. She also works with kids that get the unfortunate label of bad kid. But unlike most, Michelle and Mr. W both welcome those kids and work to find out what is behind the difficulties that they are having. We get some stories from both of them on this episode that really do give me the feels. Mr. W also talks about giving the high school age kids that he works with the tools in their toolbox to hopefully help them navigate not only the teachers in the hallway, but also bosses once they are out in the real world. It's an episode about compassion and understanding and helping those that need it, so let's get into it. It's episode number 30 with Mr. W in the Captain's Pod. All right, so Matt, Mr. W,
yes,
if you will, what is your actual title like?
So I'm a social worker at an alternative school for emotionally disabled students.
Okay.
I'm also the certified instructor for nonviolent crisis intervention.
Okay.
So I train teachers how to verbally de-escalate crises,
situations, yeah.
And then I also teach them how to personal safety techniques. Mm-hmm. So if they get hit, bit, kicked, grabbed, how to like safely and non-violently kind of get out of those. And we also do teach some restraint techniques, so it's safe and that students aren't hurt, staff's not hurt.
Yeah, you're talking about like on the physical aspect of that, as far as like nobody getting hurt, but like you're really dealing with, as a social worker, like the emotional side of what the kids are going through.
Yeah, I mean, kind of both.
Yeah.
Because you think about in a crisis, and a lot of our students have a lot of crises, whether they're just like verbal crises, they're just emotionally, they're just verbally acting out, they're externalizing, or physically, and we don't go hands-on over fifth grade, generally, unless it's in their IEP. All these things are kind of going through because you want to do what's best and what's most therapeutic for the student at the time. You don't want to increase, you don't want to escalate it, you want to try to work them back down. Yeah.
So how do kids come to your school in particular? I mean, what gets them to that point? I'm sure it's various different things, but kind of an example maybe?
Well, they all have IEPs.
Yeah. At
our school, you have to have an IEP, an individualized educational plan, to be at our school. It could be anything from truancy to, like I said, verbally berating teachers. Mm-hmm. In our elementary, a lot of times that they are a little more physically aggressive, that could get them there. Mm-hmm. Emotional meltdowns, could be social deficits. So students who just can't seem to connect or click with other students and have a lot of conflict as a result.
So would this be like if in the regular classroom, like public education, they're having probably some issues or trouble like staying in the public school system? Or can parents come there and say, oh, I want my son or daughter to go here as well?
Well, it's interesting. Our school generally has the kind of reputation of where the quote-unquote, and I hear this all the time when I go to IEP meetings, it's where the bad kids go.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And so most parents, we have had a couple parents that have gone to IEP meetings and like request, like, hey, they need something. Mm-hmm. They need something a little smaller. Because we have, smaller classrooms and a lot more therapeutic support. For the most part, most parents are like, oh, I want my kid going there.
Yeah.
They run crazy in the hallways. which occasionally that happens. I mean, I have those days where you got staff and students just pulling their hair out going,
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I've worked in public education for 17 years, and I've worked my district. I'm very fortunate, and I say fortunate because I love working with students with IEPs, and I love working with kids with like emotional disturbances or behavior disorders also, because I think that, on a day-to-day basis, it is kind of unpredictable sometimes, and you do have to recognize as a teacher that strategies and things that work sometimes aren't going to consistently work. And I feel like those are the kids that, while they give us the most problems, can be some of the most interesting people with so much to share, just great connections with kids that have had, been labeled as BD or almost going that alternative school route. I find they're very, very philosophical even, and just know a lot, and they're just not buying into whatever we're providing in the public education system.
Which is actually why I'm drawn to it, because I worked in foster care for 10 years. I worked in a real intense program, and then wanted to work in the schools because I wasn't spending enough time with kids. Here you go into, I went to social work. I was really drawn to working with youth. Mm-hmm. I would see them a couple times a month, and we did a lot of activities and stuff, but it wasn't like that daily kind of in the trenches.
Right.
You're in the trenches, but it wasn't that daily. So I got into the schools, and I was in alternative schools, and I actually went to a gen ed building working with the self-contained students. Sorry for the lingo. We're using a lot of the lingo.
Okay.
Tell us if we're saying too much lingo.
Yeah.
Okay.
Self-contained are students who basically stay within one or two classrooms all day.
Okay.
And they may go out for like lunch or PE, but it's pretty much like they have difficulty handling the gen ed classroom.
Okay.
So, but I worked in a gen ed building with self-contained students, and I just didn't like it. I was like, my heart is in alternative schools. It really is. Because they're fun. Yes, it's really frustrating sometimes, and there's times I'm like, oh, geez, what am I doing? And then other times, you make that connection, and I have a really small caseload for social worker in the school, so I have like 22 students, which a lot sometimes seems like a ton. But, you get to make those connections, and they're just fun, and they're honest. That's what I always appreciate about the students I work with. Just a lot of times they're just so delightfully honest, and they're just kind of raw, and it's kind of like, I don't know. It's you really feel like you're reaching out, you're making those connections with people. Sometimes students have difficulty connecting.
Yeah.
You feel like there's a stigma as far as the school being the school for bad kids. Now, you as a social worker, you have like direct interaction with some of these kids, and like, do you ever feel like there is just maybe a mislabeling of some of these kids, or there's something where they come in and they really surprise you that they really don't have to be there?
And that's what's interesting, because what happens is, we do get those students who come in, and you're like, why, and you pass the honeymoon period. All students have a honeymoon period. You get like 3 weeks, sometimes a month. Some students come in with no honeymoon period. But, you come in and you meet them, and you're just like, after a few months, you're like, why are you even here, And sometimes, not to knock the building they're coming from, but sometimes it's kind of like they got a rep or they got a label at this particular school, and they didn't know what to do with them, or send them to the alternative school. But I can safely say with 99% of the students, like, once you're able to make that connection, they're really a lot of fun. And I'm a real strengths-based guy, so I'm always finding, like, even the one who just comes across as just the most emotionally cold or distant or jaded, or I'm always like looking for that strength. What's that one strength we can kind of build on?
Yeah.
So and there are other ones who, they're short timers. They come here. A lot of times it's maybe for a punishment, a consequence for bringing something to school they shouldn't have, or getting in a fight or something. The short-termers, they kind of come in, they do their time, quote-unquote. That sounds awful. It's not a prison.
Yeah.
The slap on the wrist from okay, you're going to go do a semester or so, and see how you do. And then they're out, and they integrate back into transition back to their school.
What ages are the kids at your school that you work with?
Well, our school is K through 12.
Okay.
I'm primarily assigned to high school.
All right.
I do have some junior high students.
Yeah. Do you find like the older the kids are, almost more, because I'm middle school, so I teach 7th grade. They're like, 11, 12, 13, around that age. I find a lot of times when we have students coming in or just newly getting labeled with like BD through like the special education process, I find that the older they are, the more jaded that they are by like the whole system. Like it's kind of like they've been beat down a little bit, so it's harder to reach them. So working with high school kids, what are some things you notice with some of the older students?
Well, what happens is when they get that label, And they just get, it's almost, you can see it in the parents, you hear it in the parents' voices, because how many meetings have they been called to at the school? How many phone calls have they gotten? Even before, let's say, they've gotten evaluated for special education. So they've already, you're already dealing with a pretty significant trail usually. Some students, it's not. Some students, they will have some event or something will kind of click, and they'll start showing some emotional issues. But, others, it's a pretty long trail. So you do find sometimes in high school, it's like these guys just like, I've heard it all. I mean, I've constantly just felt rejected from school, and now here's the ultimate rejection. I have to be in a special school. I get picked up by a quote-unquote short bus. Yeah. The message they're sending is basically, we don't want you here. I always encourage, kids to kind of embrace it. Yeah, you don't color inside the lines. Cool. That's okay. The world needs people who can, who refuse to kind of, be the minions. And so I kind of take it that more, there's nothing wrong with that. And I say, I choose to work in a school like this for that reason, just kind of embrace the freak flag and wave it. You know what I mean? Pardon me, vernacular.
Well, I mean,
freak
that's
flag.
true.
That's what we're all about. Just embracing the freak flag.
Exactly.
Go with that. Well, I think a lot of those kids. The unfortunate thing, and I think this happens with certain people, whether it's I have attention deficit disorder, so I don't think like everybody else, and I think a lot of times those kids that are being pegged as the bad kids, I don't believe there's such thing as a bad kid, but a lot of people do, and I feel like they're the ones that could be contributing the most to the classroom and the ideas, and whenever they're curious or challenge authority in the classroom, and sometimes it's not even really challenging your authority, it's just asking a question about an idea you have, we kind of squash that, we put that down and don't let them embrace who they really are. In my situation, I get frustrated because I like working with kids like that, and I feel a lot of teachers don't.
Right.
I know, you said, like, I don't want to say anything bad about the other schools, but I think in public education, we are doing a disservice to a lot of people because we want everyone to fit inside the box within the lines, and it's not for everyone.
Well, and I agree. I think that from my experience in dealing with my sons in the public school system, I mean, my older boy they tried to label him ADHD, and I went to observe. And I observed, and I said he wasn't doing anything differently than any of the other kids were doing, any of the other boys in the school were doing. So I think that sometimes, unfortunately, there are teachers who just don't want to deal with it. And I'm going to say that. I mean, in the public school system, there are a lot of teachers that should not be teachers.
Exactly.
They just want to get those kids off their plate and push them to the side, and that's where those labels start happening that you're talking about, Matt. Now, Michelle, I don't know if you can get into this, but you just had a student recently who had been labeled his entire time and recently was given an award, right?
Oh, yeah. I have a student this year that has a history of just having behavior problems. Like, at the beginning of the year, he's like, I'm not going to write. None of my teachers ever have me write. Can you just put me in the hallway like everyone else does? So, I start talking with him and realize, wow, he can't even write like a paragraph because whenever he acted up, they just sent him somewhere. And I said, well, that's not acceptable. He goes, well, last year I could just do nothing and that was okay. I said, well, it's not okay this year. So little by little, I got him to start writing. He's the point now he writes, full essays, and he's really made great gains. Like, he's, has like all A's, B's, a couple of C's, where he had been failing his entire year. I mean, he still has things where he'll sleep in class, and he needs a different system. Like, and we allow that within our school with our team of teachers. And so we have an award that we like to give students just to kind of like honor them. And we decided to give him the award. And as a team of teachers, we had other teachers who had him in the past kind of like questioning us. And here we're like, who cares if he's not like to where everybody else is yet? He's made these like outstanding like gains. And it was just like one of those moments where I was like, my team of teachers, people were like in tears, and I was like, no, I'm adamant about this. We're giving him this, and that's what he deserves, and we'll just deal with it. But I think it's that mentality that kids that are like this are usually very sensitive, highly sensitive, I would say, and they know when you don't like them. Oh. They know. So, like, you can try to pretend, and like, so kids, like, with me, know I genuinely like kids, and so they will connect with me a lot of times where they won't with other teachers, but you can't fake that you like someone, and they will turn off instantly in that.
But the thing is that when he got that award, and he was recognized for the fact that he did make improvements.
Yeah.
His response.
Well, yeah, that's right. The day when he got honored, he came with his mom, and he usually doesn't come to school on Fridays because he has like a shortened like schedule type of thing. He actually made it to school that day for that like breakfast, and we give him just like this goofy little pin with like our school mascot on it, and he like just took it right away and like put it on his jacket, and like that's not something he would normally do. And then he looked at his mom, and he's like, "Now you can start one of those books with my awards in it, like you have for my sister." And then I was like, "Oh my God," I'm like about to cry, and I'm just like, just that like one thing, and it just makes me sad that like sorry, I cry about everything, but like that he went through like his whole school experience and no one like wanted him to write, or he never got an award that he felt like he could just be proud of himself.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how many of those stories are out there. And then, what a lot of times, by the time when they end up kind of coming to us, you find that it's this trail of kind of, as these students have internalized it as failure,
right?
And they just constantly beat over the head about what they do wrong, and
right.
And it kind of goes to a lot of times, when you're looking at a student's behavior, first thing you go to is, okay, what's the motivation? Like, what is the reasoning? What's going on? Why is a student, every behavior has a purpose. And I tell the students all the time, so even if they don't realize it, I'm like, hey man, all behavior is purposeful.
Right.
So even the stuff I do. And you find out, okay, well, why is he acting up? And we have a lot of students at our school who, read, high school students read like at a third grade level. And even in a smaller classroom with 5, 6, 7, 8 students, they're embarrassed. They're ashamed because the last thing you want is your peers going, "Hey, you're stupid. You can't read."
Right.
None of our students actually talk
right.
like that. But, and so you do find that they'll act up. They'll do anything to avoid because they're so afraid of, of being different.
Right.
And which is interesting, And then imagine you're at a school specifically for students who quote unquote are kind of different, and then to be like the sub hierarchy of that, like, oh my God, now I'm in this school, I'm labeled this, and now I don't want my peers to think. And that's when we see a lot of the verbal externalizing, like, I'm going to tell a teacher to go screw themselves
right.
because it's going to make me look cool and
right.
funny in front of the other students, and I get to get out of reading or writing a paragraph.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you see that all the time.
Yeah. No, I love when you say that because that's like one of the key things like I learned early on is like every like what we would call a negative behavior or acting out is basically a need for something. So like as teachers then we have to look and say, okay, he's acting out, throwing his book against the wall, or like, why is that? Is that because, just completely overwhelmed at this point? And a lot of times it does boil down to sort of an academic need that they might just need a little more practice or a little help focusing on something. And once they achieve that success, they feel good. No one wants to get up and have a horrible day and tons of conflict with people at school. And I think we forget that sometimes.
Although I think I would say I've run into some teachers over the years that actually I think do get up and go, who can I?
Yeah.
Well, they do.
What
They
pot can I stir today?
Well,
it's weird.
yeah.
And I've truly, and not at this particular
right.
school that I would care, but I've worked at one school in particular, and they were just, and I hate to use the word evil, but just like, wow. And I understand that everybody's got their story, and one of the reasons I work with kids is because sometimes adults, it's like they're kind of annoying.
Kind of annoying. Yeah.
It's like you feel like, listen, I'm not here to help you. Like you have got your issues. I'm sorry you have your issues, but don't take it on these kids.
Right.
Yeah. And it goes back to what you said. I when I do this training on this nonviolent crisis intervention, I said one of the first things I say is kids have BS detectors. They have a sixth sense. Like, it's amazing. And as a social worker, I get this cool little world where students will come to my office and they will tell me stuff that, they won't tell anybody else or whatever. And to hear the amount of students who are able to peg the teachers who don't, because, you kind of figure out who is really the real deal and who's not.
Yeah.
And, students will come in and they'll be like, yeah, I can tell this teacher isn't like me.
Yeah.
And I'll know they're right. Right.
Yeah,
I can't say anything, of course.
Exactly.
But they do. They have an absolute BS detector, and it's like, and they look out and they look for those genuine people, and
Yeah.
And I think teachers say, oh, Mr. W, a lot of students like want to talk to you, and I have a lot of students who are on my caseload. Oh, can I be on your caseload? And it's not that I give them candy or
right.
here's $1 for
right.
asking to see me. I think they just I'm pretty real. I'm pretty
Yeah.
genuine. I'll just kind of what you see is what you get. I'll admit my faults. We'll talk and I'll share. It's a kind of this reciprocal thing. It's not just, so Timmy, tell me your problems, and I'm going to sit here and just nod along. We're going to have a conversation, and we're going to connect, and I'm going to empathize, and I'm going to tell you when I think you're, hey, you can do better in this, and how can I help you do better in this? And it's, it's like a relationship.
Right.
It's a true relationship, and that's how. I think it's how kids grow.
Do you find like other people kind of, maybe other teachers or other people, sometimes, maybe not where you're at now, but in the past have been maybe like kind of hating on you a little bit, like for your good relationship that you have with the kids sometimes?
I think they think that it's all fun and games.
Okay.
You
like
know?
they go to you and, like you said, get candy or something?
Oh, yeah, and we
Okay.
just play Uno, and it's like, no, I mean, I do work, and I always, like, I'm up to my elbows a lot of times because... when you have a student disclose that they were sexually abused,
right?
That's real. That's a very real thing. And of course, I can't share that with teachers. I can't go, when they're saying, "Well, so and so has seen you a lot," and you're going, "Well, they just got an eviction notice and their water's cut off." Like I don't like telling kids business, and that's one
Right.
teachers don't actually like that because we should know about that stuff. And I'm like, you should know that he's struggling right now. He's got a bunch of stuff going on.
Right.
But I don't like getting really specific because, I've been in the lounge and a lot of chatter goes on, and a lot of gossip and a lot of drama, and it's like, I always eat lunch with students, to be honest with you. I never eat lunch in the teacher's lounge.
Me either.
A lot of times they just don't get it.
Right.
And they don't get that there's a lot going on that they don't know about. But they could if they just reached out a little more, if they just demonstrated genuine empathy. And they always say, well, what do I do about this kid? I get that a lot. Teachers go, what do I do about this kid? This kid's doing this. And I'll say, have you pulled them aside and said, hey, what's going on? Like, I'm really worried about you, or you seem really upset, or, are you struggling? And they kind of look at me like, what? And I'm like, no, just try it.
that.
It's really easy,
Yeah.
and you don't have to say, you're doing this. Stop talking out in my class. Pull them aside and say, seems like you got something on your mind.
Right.
It's amazing the amount of teachers have come back and said, wow, I did that, and the student totally responded. It's like, yeah, it's pretty,
Yeah, well, there's like the whole saying of like kids don't care what you know until they know that you care, and I
Yep.
firmly believe in that. Like, to me, like anything I'm teaching is secondary. Like, I could stand up there all day and talk to you about conjugating verbs or how you should write your essay, but if they don't feel like I care about them as a person, they're not going to do anything and they're not going to learn. So that really makes sense, that connection, that building that relationship piece.
As far as the students go, and I know you say that there's that big stigma built up even within the kids' minds of the fact that like they are now in the bad kids school. And I mean, through the process of you talking to some of these kids and you saying like, it's okay, man, like let your freak flag fly. I mean, is that enough? Do they embrace that? And is it enough to overcome that stigma of like, I'm at the bad kids school? Or is the fact that they've been sent there in the first place almost condemning them?
I think to some extent it is really difficult. Maybe some of the students who have social deficits, maybe some of our high-end functioning, autistic students, on the higher end of the spectrum, they're a little more embracing that because they've always felt like they never fit in.
Yeah.
But some of the other students who all their friends and then from the neighborhood go to the gen ed building, it is really difficult. And it's amazing sometimes even parents to hear the students say, my parents say I go to the quote, and pardon the use of this word, I go to the retard school, and I'm using air quotes, which no one can see other than you two. And, when parents are saying that to their kids, it's really hard, and they go, I have a lot of students say, I just want it, just send me back. I'll prove to you guys, I hear that a lot. If you guys just send me back, I will guarantee you I won't get any more trouble.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if I had $1 for every time I heard that, like, probably could have retired, 10 years ago. And I just keep saying, you got to kind of prove it here. And if you can prove it here where it's really difficult, because you do have a lot of students in the class, they're externalizing, they're internalizing, you're dealing with all sorts of different personality types. That's your guarantee. You're saying that message back to your home school that, okay, we've worked through whatever we've needed to work through.
So what is a success to you? I mean, is it the student that does get integrated back into the gen ed building, or is it the person that just embraces who they are and lets their freak flag fly? All of the above?
Yeah, whatever. And I always say, the first time I ever meet with a student, It's like, what do you want? What's your goal?
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
if your goal is to transition back to your home school, then let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a success. If your goal is to not, you know, if your goal is to maybe do a partial transition, if your goal is to just graduate high school, if your goal is to, you know, get through the day without cursing out a teacher, you know, kind of whatever their goals are.
Yeah. So what accommodations? So like, okay, so they're not fitting in necessarily at a traditional style classroom. How is your school different? So like, what are some of the things or strategies maybe that you would say would differ from, you know, just like the regular classroom?
Well, a lot of our students, majority of our students have behavior intervention plans.
Right.
And I think when you have a smaller classroom, I think you're really able to try and differentiate instruction and try and meet those behavioral needs too.
Right.
We do have things like transaction sheets, and we do kind of like a token economy to help students demonstrate some accountability for their own behavior.
Right.
And, you know, on our transaction sheets, you know, the students write down how they feel they did throughout the period, and then the teachers write down.
Right.
We just try to have my thing is always trying to open up that dialogue, just try and get them to kind of reflect on that. We also have a lot of social workers in the building.
That's good.
So when students are having issues, you know, if one of my students, I'm not available due to some other issue, you know, there's always some supportive staff, because a lot of times kids come off the bus and you can just tell, like,
Yeah.
you're going to have a rough one.
So it seems like there's more of a break in your schedule, like will allow for that time, like if they need to talk with a social worker, or that's essential.
I mean, and our, you know, a lot of times it's like academics are important,
Right.
but they're not necessarily here for academics. It's not really the issue. They're here because they're having difficulty dealing with stress, or they're having difficulty expressing themselves, or what have you. So we make sure, you know, that need is met.
Yeah. I talked to you about the bad side of that stigma and all that thing of going to the school in the first place, but have you had students that feel much more at ease in this environment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Quite a few students, they don't want to transition back because, hey, I know what the expectations are. You know, I kind of know what the norm is, whenever that is. You know, the norm looks a little different than the average. I know what's expected of me. I know I can get help. You know, I know I have supports, less kids to worry about. And then once more, it's usually that I have quite a few of my higher functioning autistic students.
Right.
They're the ones who generally kind of like, okay, I know the routine. It's predictable.
Yeah.
I bet if we had like a sensory room for our high school students that was a little more geared toward that, whether it was just a music break or something.
Yeah.
Well, it could just be that break from reality. You're walking in there and it's kind of like colorful, and you know there's a lot of that stuff happening.
And a lot of those kids like need that. I mean, if you have a sensory issue or a lot of input bothers you, it doesn't stop at elementary school. I mean, it carries off into your life. As an adult, I have to know like what I need to do when I get overstimulated, like sensory wise. Like I have to shut myself off or put my headphones in the office when everybody's talking, when I just need a break. A lot of the kids I find at middle school don't want to go to that room, even if it's in their IEP, because they view it as being like a weird or an off thing. Yet when they do it, or I do something different, like let's go listen to music in the hallway, or let's go take a walk around, and just they benefit from that. So again, I think it's one of those like stigma type things where if we just were more accepting, like, hey, you know what, some people, they need to take a break, and this is what they need to do to be successful, and we were more accepting of it, I think kids and people in general would be willing to do that for themselves.
Well, you know what I say, the worst thing that ever happened was for them to integrate music players and phones, because I'm a huge advocate of kids being able to listen to music in class.
Right.
Like, you know, not necessarily while the teacher's talking, but I know with a lot of the ADHD students, it's really beneficial, help tune things out.
Right.
A lot of the, you know, students with sensory issues. But what happens, and we have found this even, we started to let up just a little bit, you know, so like certain teachers started letting students listen to music in class, because there's either let them listen to music in class, or they're bouncing around the room, or, you know, students are getting in these verbal conflicts. And then, but students had a really difficult time, like, knowing the line between being able to listen to your music and texting and Snapchatting. And, you know, all of a sudden we just opened this door. Yeah. And by, you know, now we're at the end of the year, and it's just been kind of chaos. You know, we have no more control over any of this, and it stinks, because there's such a huge, you know, therapeutic benefit to listening to music, but then the fact that they can't discern, okay, I'm just listening to music, I can't now I can't. Oh, my friend texted me. Oh, I'm playing, Clash of Clans. They can't.
Well, it's hard for those kids.
That.
Like the boundary thing, like, and I find even like with students that I've been successful with, I need to, if I like let up a little bit, then I realize, oh, I didn't really explain that if you have your phone out, I don't want you doing this. So then I have to find them at a time and have like a conversation. And really, I find a lot of the kids like that are really accepting and understanding if they understand you have a reason that makes sense to them for what versus just trying to control them. So if they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense, but it's that whole boundary issue and like reestablishing and your purpose for why you're doing certain things.
But I'll tell you what, if you're listening to music and all of a sudden that text message ping happens, and then you get that distraction,
right.
it's kind of hard.
It's
right,
so
exactly.
true. It's so true. It's like right there, and then they want to answer it, or yeah, definitely.
Well, and two, I always find it funny too because how many staff members do I see with their phones out?
Right.
Yeah.
And like I have a thing where my phone never leaves my office. It usually stays in my bag.
Right.
Because my thing is, if we expect the students not to do it, and I'm a big believer in that. If students aren't supposed to drink in the hallway, you're not going to see me walking around with a coffee cup drinking in the hallway. I mean, I just feel like we got to. But I see a lot of staff doing it, and then the answer is the classic, "Well, we're staff." And it's like, well, you can't have it. You can't tell students,
right?
You can't be on your phones. You can't be distracted by your phones, and then a staff is on their phone.
And we need kids. Honestly, I think for society and people at my school, I know think I'm weird sometimes because I kind of get excited like when a kid like challenges my authority or questions those things because big picture, that's not right. That's not fair. And they have like a sense of like justice in the world.
Yeah.
Like they want things to be just. And just because you're an adult and you are in this position of power over me, you shouldn't be having certain privileges necessarily that I don't have. And I think, as a society, those are the leaders and those are the people that ask good questions and make social change.
We are so far
like
past the because I said so mentality with
Yeah.
teaching. Now, you're dealing with high school kids, in your particular realm. What do you find? I'm sure it's different for all of them, but is there end goals as far as do they seek education further after coming out of your school, or is it mostly just trying to integrate them into working society?
Honestly, it depends.
Yeah.
We have some students who go on to community college and want to use that community college as a step to a 4-year. Some students just trying to get them into the workforce, trying to get them out of high school, basically.
Yeah.
With some skill or some ability just to function. And we always say, if you're standing up to your teacher, you got to look at this in microcosm. It's just like having a boss. And then, of course, students say, well, you guys aren't paying me. And then, of course, the comeback always is, and I try not to get involved in this one, is like, we're paying you with an education.
Because that's awesome.
And I'm like, I shake my head, and the students are like, oh, it's not the same. So it kind of depends. And I think sometimes I don't feel like we're doing enough. I feel like we're not doing enough.
Right.
Because sometimes it gets, okay, let's just get them out of high school, and then, well, then what? What's really, all the students have transition plans, but sometimes I don't feel like enough effort is really, you can have a transition plan and just have it be this kind of shell, as opposed to something that's really meaningful and really addresses what they're going to need to make it in kind of, real life.
Well, there's a difference of just getting by with a kid because they're a pain in the neck and just pushing them onto someone else. Like, we just got to get through this year with this kid, then it's someone else's problem. That then becomes, let's get them out of the school, and it's society's problem. And we're not really teaching kids to be self-aware or how to, employ strategies that will help them be successful in life. And I feel the same way. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, we're doing stuff, but this is not enough for this whole child to be successful.
I got to ask you guys, you guys have both been geeking out about this book that's sitting right here. And maybe you can kind of explain a bit of, this is obviously a teacher's tool.
Yeah, it's a book called Lost at School. It's by Ross Greene, and he originally wrote a book called The Explosive Child. Now, I didn't read that one, but Matt said that he did. And then this book is really just talking about what we're talking about here, how there are these kids that we have in our school system that present problems to us, and that we definitely are taking the wrong approach to them sometimes in traditional education with like, stop talking in my class, stop fidgeting, and just telling them constantly what they're doing wrong. He focuses on identifying like lagging skills, which is what we were talking about. It could be academic, social, emotional. That's usually the source of the actual problem. And then having what he calls Plan B conversations with kids. Like, so probably something Matt would do as a social worker, like, hey, I'm noticing you're having some conflicts in class with Mr. So-and-so. Can you tell me about that? What's going on there? How are you feeling about that? And really getting their perspective and having them be part of the solution, creating a plan and that like that social interaction with it. And we've started using it in my school a little bit, and it's really amazing because it's helping some of the people that don't naturally know how to deal with those kids think about, to me it's like natural, innate, like ever since I started teaching, like I just knew I'm empathetic. Like I'm like, can see a problem starting to happen, so I'm proactive and I take care of it. But a lot of people maybe aren't on that same plane, so this is a helpful tool. You said it kind of helped me maybe provide like a structure or something like that.
It's kind of in there in black and white. I mean, he talks about the Plan B thing. I mean, it's more just like a way of putting it into not a system, but just kind of organizing it as opposed to, I mean, yeah, you can always pull a student aside and it's amazing how many people don't even realize that that's like an option. You can pull them aside and say, hey, here's what I'm seeing. How are you feeling? Mm-hmm. And kind of leaving that open-ended. And I think he's big in like the open-ended, right. Like you ask questions to get them to open up and to, you kind of ask them these big, broad questions to get them to start to express themselves. Because that's when you really find out what the problem is, But it's just a nice little framework to follow, A couple of years ago in particular, I was really using that one, the explosive child, because we were having a couple of students that were just really challenging, and people were just scratching their heads going, we don't know what to do. And because after our school, there's a more restrictive placements.
Okay.
And anytime they start throwing that out, it's like, well, let's make sure we're doing everything we need to do. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, and a lot of it depends on kind of the open-mindedness of who you're working with. Mm-hmm. Because there are some people you're like, hey, I got this great book, and they go, oh, great, another book, great, another solve it. And a lot of, they kind of roll their eyes, and you're like, no, you got to.
Well, it would seem a book called The Explosive Child is like a portrait of the kids that you're dealing with.
Yeah. Right.
But I know what Matt's talking about. I mean, I've encountered this in different schools that I've been in, and I've just gotten to the point now, early on I wouldn't do this in my teaching career, but I'll do this now. I'm very blunt and honest with kids. So sometimes a kid might say to me, so-and-so doesn't like me, and I'm going, yeah, I can see why you would think that. They maybe don't. So you're going to like not learn anything and screw up your whole career and like right now in this moment just because that person's got a problem with you. I said, I don't know if that's a really good choice right now, and just being honest with them and talk about, there's going to be people in life that don't like you. And to me, every moment is a learning situation. And the PC thing to do would be like, oh no, I'm sure they really like you, and like, right. Without getting like real specific, I just kind of bring it more general with the child, like, there's probably going to be people that don't like you. So are you just going to not do anything and be mad about it and be in misery about it? Or what are you going to do about it? I think my frankness surprises kids sometimes because they can tell I'm being honest and genuine. Right. And that goes a long way with kids. And they'll just be like, okay, it kind of makes sense to them. And then maybe they'll kind of change some things around. But there are people that just are that way, and you can try to put things in front of them, and sometimes it's just modeling things for them. I find they're just scared, and people themselves, teachers are people too, so them acting out in that negative way, there's something with them, like there's some need of theirs not being met. Maybe they feel like they're inferior or something like that, so then just helping them, I do a lot of coaching with teachers and modeling lessons and ideas, and once they see it and try it and sometimes have success, then that kind of sways them a little bit as well.
And that's one thing I talk about with students a lot, and when they do the old, I don't think so-and-so likes me, it's like, well, very similar to where it's like, okay, is there anything you can do about it? What control, do you have any control over it? All right, how are you responding? I mean, and I say, I'm an adult, do you think we all the staff get along? We're like, no, you're going to have conflicts, and conflict's natural, it happens, The key is, how are you going to deal with it so that you get what you need?
Right.
And, without getting into the power struggle and without escalating it. And because I always talk about with students, who's going to win the power struggle? And they always go, they will. Okay, great. Case, yeah. That's, hey.
But it's really just giving these kids that maybe haven't had those tools in their toolbox in the past, and it is now giving those tools to them. Is essentially what you're doing, right?
Absolutely. Because it is very normal what goes on, and it really is this kind of microcosm. You're going to have a boss that you don't like. Mm-hmm. You have a boss that seems like he's picking on you. How are you going to deal with it? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times how they deal with it at school is going to translate to that, and trying to put that in perspective for them.
Yeah, I think it's about giving people control, like, over themselves, because in school systems and in institutions at work, fundamentally we feel controlled. Mm-hmm. And people that are highly sensitive or have ADHD or even gifted, like you'll find gifted people with like behavior problems, they don't like being controlled by other people, and it's just giving back to students that feeling or that sense that you really do control how you react in a situation, and that's where your control comes into place. And I think that's the essential part with these kids is helping them find that control in a positive way.
Well, I think probably the line I use, I end up saying the most is, you can't control what other people do, you can only control how you react.
Right.
It's the only thing you have control over. And so a lot of times I'll start off the sentence like, oh, what am I going to say? And then they go, oh, I know, we can't control things around. Jeez, Mr. W, darn it. And then we laugh. Yeah, then we play Uno, and I give them candy.
I love how you have the teenager talk down. They do talk that way to adults sometimes.
Yeah, when they either know you're right, and they begrudging like, oh, jeez, or they have no idea what to do. Yeah. It's amazing that some of these students that we tend to kind of look down upon are honestly some of the most vibrant, caring, intelligent, sensitive students. And I think we as a school system do a great disservice by not embracing them more. Because, the resiliency of so many of our students is just amazing. And it's like, I always say, but I really hope that, these kids don't go to law school. Because or you really do hope they do, because they're just amazing students. So maybe next time, if you hear about one of those bad kids, you say, and I'm sure there's a lot of good in them.
Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always great to sit down with like-minded people for a discussion. A huge thanks to Matt, a.k.a. Mr. W, for sitting down with us. If you're interested in the books that we discussed in the episode, make sure you check the episode description or summary for direct links to Lost at School and The Explosive Child, both of those by Ross W. Green, Ph.D. If you're a new shipmate on the Captain's Pod and you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the show. We've got direct links at the top of our Facebook page that will take you directly to iTunes or Stitcher or the RSS feed or whatnot. If you'd like to become a patron of the show, like Ray Slover and Jacob Balson, just head over to thecaptainspod.com and check out our Patreon page there for all the info. Thank you again to Mr. W and Michelle Lynn. Thank you to the rest of the crew, Ash, Kelly, Eric, Twitter guy Adam, and Guru Ramon. And thank you again for being a shipmate and listening. I love you with all the feels, for reals. More geeky fun with all the feels coming this week from the Captain's Pod.